Hi Greg, how are you doing today?
How are you doing, Chris?
I'm not doing too bad. I was here a few years ago.
Yes.
I think it was back in 2015.
It was, fall of 15.
Yeah, and there was a railroad in this room and we went through it, ran some trains, and it was all about Lindsay and the history that drove you to model railroading in a big way. And
that's right.
And since that time, you managed to change pretty much everything up here.
That's right.
I'm here today, I guess, to see the progress. It's been 2 years now. So you've actually torn your whole layout down and rebuilt it in 2 years. How in the world could you do that in such a short period of time?
Well, it's early stages still, Chris.
Yeah.
But I took my layout down in spring of 16.
Yeah.
And there was a number of reasons for that, but basically I had my old layout depicting Lindsay as the center of the universe for about 22 years.
Yes.
And I felt the layout had sort of run its course.
Yeah.
This is a 100-year-old farmhouse. It needed new windows. It needed upgraded insulation. It needed some floor repair. And those things are hard to do with a layout in place.
No kidding.
So I did retire at the end of 15, and I decided the time was right to take it down and start over.
Well, you know, can you refresh us a little bit about the old layout, what its design was, what its issues were, and what sort of made you think about making the big changes?
Well, I had taken a design from Model Railroader, I guess in the early 1990s. I started building in 93. Made some mistakes of salvaging track from a previous layout.
Yeah.
Not a good idea. The basic design, of course, had Lindsay in the middle.
Yeah.
But it had, essentially the layout was in the middle of the room and people walked around it.
Okay, so what, that was more of like the dog bone kind of approach to railroading? It was a folded
dog bone, which I thought utilized the space the best because we have a center staircase, and I thought the folded dog bone would be the best suited for the room.
Yeah.
The end result was every town was either on a curve or on a grade.
Yes.
There was a lot of curves, a lot of grades. Steam engines don't necessarily like that. And, you know...
What does it do for the track, though, when you're building a layout like that? It complicates things in terms of the spacing, eh?
You have a lot of track in a small space, and I discovered that I wanted to model some of the structures around Lindsay more prototypically. I like building structures. I didn't have a lot of room for structures, and the old layout was very hard to put structures in place, or, you know, I just didn't have enough room between tracks.
For a lot of people, that's a pretty big move, a brave move, to say, okay, I'm going to try something completely different after having something that was, you know, finished and working so well. What motivated you to just say, okay, it's happening, I'm going to do it?
Well, Chris, you and Leila are part of that, that thinking that shifted a paradigm that said you don't have to have the same footprint that you did have.
Yeah.
You know, you've got a long wall, why aren't you utilizing it?
Right.
And in fact, you have two long walls that are close to 24 feet long. Why are you not using those? And I said, well, I have windows. And I'll soon have new windows, and my wife will go crazy if I cover them. But it got me thinking that maybe there's a different way of doing it. So basically, I took about 4 or 5 layout design elements that I really wanted to have on a new layout.
And what were those?
I wanted to have the Lindsay shops. That was a prominent area in Lindsay. I wanted to have the Durham Street yard where my dad and grandparents lived across from. I wanted to have Blackwater Junction modeled. I wanted to have Mariposa, a small town outside of Lindsay, and Uxbridge modeled. The track plans as close as I could, obviously compressed quite a bit.
Yes.
I wanted to have those design elements. There's also a bridge over the Scugog River in Lindsay. They called the Iron Bridge that the kids always jumped off. So I wanted to have that on my layout.
Yes.
So basically I came up with those design elements, and then I tried to put things in a logical order. I had to make a few compromises to fit the room,
Yeah.
but in general I got the scenic elements, the design elements that I wanted.
So moving away from the dog bone concept to sort of following along around the room and standing in the middle, one of the side benefits of that as well is that it changed the ratio of track to structures and how the scenery was affected.
That's right. I have a lot more room for structures.
Yeah.
I've just started to touch on scenery. I have more structures obviously to build, but that's a good thing for me.
Yes.
And I wanted to be able to have a little bit of breathing space for the structures so they're not crammed in tight.
Yeah.
And it really opened up a lot of opportunities for me that got me pretty excited. Because I mean, when you're taking down a layout that you've had for 22 years, that can be kind of discouraging.
Sure.
But if you have that optimism of a new life, a new beginning, it gets pretty exciting.
Well, that sure looks like you're having a lot of fun based on the big smile on your face. Maybe we could look at how you design your track plan.
Okay.
So Greg, tell us a little bit about how you went about building your track plan.
Well, I started it in a traditional way with just sketching with a pen and paper.
Yeah.
And I came up with a couple of designs that I wanted to try.
Yeah.
Luckily, my son was studying electrical engineering technology, and he was pretty good with CAD.
Right.
And so when I had it down to a couple of candidate designs, I had him draw it up in CAD.
You had to twist his arm, did you?
A little bit.
Yeah.
But he was pretty excited to be able to help as well.
I guess it's payback for all those hockey practices you took him to in the morning.
So I had a couple of designs and I bounced them off some people.
Yeah.
And I came out with one that I thought was workable.
Yeah.
And
when you say bounced it off, I know you're a member of OVAR. Was that helpful in terms of getting some ideas?
It was really helpful in terms of trying to avoid the spaghetti bowl, trying to avoid putting too much track in too small an area, and leaving yourself some room for scenery and structures.
And there's a lot of people in the city that are part of operational groups that are used to moving trains around and how they work and so on. So I'm sure they helped you in the context of making sure that if you wanted to run trains in an operational way, that you would be able to do that.
That's right. And they had me think about, where would the operator be? Where would you operate, let's say, the Lindsay yard from? Where would Kirkfield be operated from? Would they be back to back? If they were back to back, that's a fairly narrow space. There's only 2 feet there. So then that said, okay, well, I have to operate Kirkfield from this side where we have a lot more room.
Let's have a look at this CAD drawing. Maybe we can see what the whole layout's about, starting from, even though it's continuous running, it also has a design from point to point. So maybe we can start at one end and go to the other.
Okay, one of the things that your viewers may have recognized is I had the Lindsay shops that I worked on kitchen table for about a couple of months, and it's a fairly large structure. It's over 3 feet long and about 16 inches wide, and I wanted to make sure that I could have that structure. So that was one of the things I laid out first.
What are the elements in that part?
Well, you had basically 4 tracks going in and 2 tracks being run through.
Yes.
But the whole shop is contained in a Y in order to turn the steam locomotives. So I had to have that basically in a peninsula type situation to incorporate this Y. So that was one of the design elements I really wanted to have. The Lindsay station, my grandparents were basically right across from the Durham Street yard, and I wanted to have a space where in Lindsay, I could break down the trains and divide them up into the 5 subdivisions that run out of Lindsay. So basically, the trains are broken up in the Lindsay yard.
Mm-hmm. And how many feet does that run roughly along that part?
It basically, you have, from start to finish, you have about 24 feet. So Lindsay itself is about 16 feet or more long.
So with the number of tracks there, you can accommodate quite a bit of rolling stock.
You can. Previously, in my last layout, the longest train I could run was about 8 cars because of the sidings and the passing lengths. Now I can easily do 12 or 14 cars.
That's tremendous.
Which is more prototypical.
Yeah.
Another design element, I wanted a bridge over the Scugog River, which is here. Blackwater Junction is actually a Y, so it forms there, and then it feeds off to the Cobeconk sub, and one of the largest shippers on that sub was the Kirkfield Crusher, our stone company, which sent about 30 carloads out a day. A lot of those going into Toronto for road building like the 401 project, etc.
Yes. So
I wanted the traffic coming out of Kirkfield, and it follows the Y in Blackwater. And
so that's interesting. For one industry, you've managed to create a peninsula, basically, that accommodates quite a few cars and is prototypical, but it allows you to operationally do some interesting things as well.
That's right. Those people that are familiar with the Uxbridge subdivision will know that Mariposa, which is up here, actually comes before Blackwater. But to suit the room and to make sure I had the Y, I had to substitute the order of Blackwater and Mariposa.
Yes.
So operationally, I still do basically Lindsay, Mariposa, I do a complete runaround, and then I do Blackwater and Uxbridge in the correct order. But to better suit the room, Blackwater's situated here so I can get my Y.
So there's 2 elements there. It's okay to change the order of your towns from the prototype, but still have them. And you use the continuous running aspect to get them in the right order.
It gives me a little bit longer run, and I get it in the right order.
Yeah,
I just had a hard time, reversing them on the timetable because I knew it wasn't right.
So the train still comes out of the crusher, but instead of hitting Mariposa first, it's running around and coming to Blackwater and then going to Mariposa.
That's right.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So
operationally, timetable-wise, how the trains would run would fit the reality, but the footprint is designed completely different.
That's right.
Interesting.
So those are some of the compromises you have to make. Again, Mariposa, I have the track arrangement as it was, with Hog and Lytle having an elevator, a feed company, and a coal dealer. There's
Couple farms.
A few farms, one that Chris will recognize as he built it, and just a couple of general store, church, school, etc.
There's this bizarre element here on your track plan I see next. It says the Trent Severn Waterway, and it seems like it's almost like a swing bridge, but I don't know. There's these elements with posts and things. What's all that about?
Well, that's about having a 100-year-old farmhouse, and the only place for a layout in a 100-year-old farmhouse is in the attic, a space that nobody else wanted.
So that's an open space then that comes up to a landing. Can you sort of point out how people come up the stairs so they can get an idea?
So basically, there's stairs here, there's a landing here, and this is an aisleway to come around the staircase. And it's a fairly long structure. It's about 6 feet from point here to there.
Right.
So there's actually a steel piece and post that allow that to swing.
Yeah.
And I rested on one of the pillars here when it's out of use.
Right.
And swing it back. And if you were actually in Kirkfield, you would be on the the Trent Severn waterway, and there is a lift lock at Kirkfield. So I worked in a swing bridge,
Right.
and it allowed me to have a water scene, and it really made it possible to have that complete run through.
So it's kind of interesting in the way that you've done that. People come up into the room and then you close it off, and then you're inside the railroad room.
That's right.
Yeah. So for those people that emergencies need to use the washroom, the duck under is still pretty usable.
The duck under's usable, and I can basically swing it in a couple of minutes if that's needed.
Yeah.
It's not very elaborate. There's a couple of latch locks and a cable.
I guess the trick for something that long is to have something big and sturdy to hold it so it doesn't move.
That's right. And I wanted to have scenery permanently affixed, but when you pinch it that tight, you need a bit of a swing space.
Sure.
So anyways,
Compromise it, but it still works.
Still works, and it still gives me a nice bridge scene. And if you were in Kirkfield, that's what you would see.
Yeah. So what do we got next here along the line?
Next is probably the larger village of the little ones that are on the line with Uxbridge. They had a number of feed dealers, coal dealer, and it's often where the eastbound and westbound passenger trains met.
Yes.
In the timetable. I've taken some modeling license and put in a swift packing plant just so I can have some variety of cars.
Sure.
In reality, there was another feed company there.
Well, that's pretty important. A lot of times in model railroads, the reality of a space, well, there wasn't a lot happening, and by adding extra industries, it makes it more interesting for modelers to come and run railroads.
So from that point, you're moving on to the lead into the staging yard. And I have a long lead here that serves as a caboose track.
Yeah.
And I can also store some passenger cars there. And then an arrival and a departure track that are heading into staging.
Right.
The staging is represented here. It's turned on its side just to fit on the paper.
Right.
But this, as you go out of Lindsay, there's actually a Victoria Yard, which gives me some industrial switching in Lindsay. There's a freight shed that handled about 6 cars a day. There's a coal dealer, a lumber dealer, Silverwood's Dairy. So it gives me a little bit of switching on this side, and then the main staging yard and fiddle yard is on the other wall. And basically this represents the 4 extremes of the layout.
So just to help folks here, if I took this whole section here, turned it 90 degrees that way,
Exactly.
it really goes into the room this way.
That's right.
Okay, so this is one part of staging along one side of that narrow space, and this is the other.
That's right, and you'll see that when we go out into the room.
Okay.
So if you think of it, you have Midland to the west, you have Scarborough to the south, you have Belleville to the east, and Haliburton to the north. And this staging yard has to represent all 4.
Well, let's go and see a bit of your layout now. Maybe some specific design elements that I noticed that we can talk to first, and then maybe we'll run some trains. And as we do that and go to different places, we can stop as the engineer would, and you can describe some of the elements.
Okay.